Okay, so we're almost halfway this conference, but we still have one hell of a speaker, one hell of a talk ahead of us. And I have a few announcements, of course. First, I asked you before, I'll ask you again. Please use the app and please rate the speakers. This is very useful for the speakers and for the organization to know who to invite next year and who to invite as an MC. So the talk, you can vote for the talk that nobody, it's funny, but we're not going to do that. So that's the one who gets invited here. Okay, and after this talk, there will be the official party upstairs. It's on the second floor in the room that doesn't look like an office. And that's proudly sponsored by MailChimp. Music is by DJ Populist, and dancing is allowed. And not dancing is allowed as well. Drinking is allowed. You have these tokens in your badge. If you're not going to attend the party or if you're not thirsty, you can give the tokens to the person next to you, right? They might be thirsty. They will be happy that they won't have to find out Swiss prices of beer. Okay. There will be some free finger food, but as always with finger food and drinking, maybe you should at some point get out and get some serious food if you decide to keep on drinking. Just a tip, I know, been there. And important, bring your badge and your tokens. Okay, so this brings us up to the next and final speaker of the day, Mr. Vitaly Friedman. About a year ago, a bit less than a year ago, there was a conference in Amsterdam, and I knew that Vitaly attended, so I asked him, do you want to come and do a talk for my students at university? And he said, yes, I like talking. And he came up, and he had to attend the dinner, the speaker's dinner after my talk, and I just really had to stop him because he didn't want to stop. He has this slide deck of, I think, 20,000 slides, and it just goes on and on and on, and he can just pick one and another. He just added 500 new slides to those, and he's about to show those to you. So he's probably going to go on and on and on. So I advise you, if you're thirsty, maybe you can sneak out. So after 1 hour, he'll just go on for hours here. So you can go up and come back, and he'll be here like a Cuban dictator. Okay. There's one very, very special thing to know about Mr. Vitaly Friedman. This is the 6th conference, right? The 6th front-end conf here in Zurich. And this will be his 7th talk at front-end conf, which I think is pretty amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, Vitaly Friedman.
All right. Thanks, Vasily. It was a really nice introduction. So I kind of get a bit cold, so I'll try to do my best. So what Vasily forgot to mention is I'm trying to set up a personal record now. So my personal record for speaking for the talk, not the workshop, talk, is 6 hours, 45 minutes. So let's see what we can do today, right? So how are you feeling today? This is going to be a long, long day. All right, so I do have like 502 slides, but it's not so important. Because what's more important is that we're going to do some really dirty stuff. And normally people tend to go to my talks and think that they're going to be, enjoying themselves and enjoying the, the vibe and whatever. No, you're going to do the hard work because I can't, because I almost lost my voice. So I know 3 things about you. First of all, you like dirty, you like tricks, and you like front end, right? I'm pretty sure that you also like rewards, which is why, just to, make fun of you, I brought up Icelandic chocolate. And it's not a joke, because I was in Reykjavik last week, and I think that we're going to do it in a very funny way. I'm going to post challenges, front-end challenges, and I'm going to post some of the really dirty and weird challenges that you might or might not have encountered before. And if you think that you have a right idea, then just shout. And if you are the right, have the right idea or one of the right ideas, because there are many potential options, I'm just going to throw chocolate at you. Does it sound fair to you? If you don't like chocolate, that's okay. I have backup, just in case. I don't guarantee anything, but we'll see how it goes, all right? So, but also, one last thing I have to mention. The things you're going to see, you will not be able to unsee. And I don't take any credit or responsibility for what happens after this session, all right? So with this in mind, are you ready now? Yes, some people are, 2 people in the room. Excellent. All right, so this is me. This is how it used to be, used to look like in the past. Still running Smash and Max, still doing a lot of consultancy on the side, but this is not what it's all about. So I'm going to jump straight into it, and we're going to start with some simple things, right? And just so you know me a little bit, get to know me a little bit, I'm the person who enjoys building responsive emails. And also kind of finds joy in some weird tags like the no script tag or the object tag. How many of you like the object tag? Not that many. Okay, so let's see how it goes. All right, ready? All right, let's go. So first one. Now, here's a problem for you that you have to solve. You have many complaints coming from the users of your website. And maybe you're building an online banking website, right? So you have the IBAN number provided to your users. However, when they copy-paste the IBAN, or is it just IBAN? IBAN? I have no idea. Number, if they copy-paste it in the software of their choice, very often it's either truncated, right? Or you just incorrectly copy-pasted because you have empty spaces in between, or maybe some separators. And that's really annoying. You want to kind of avoid this, right? Can we do better than this? Now, we know this stuff, like the IBAN, and it has, I think, 10, 18, 22 digits, right? And we have 2 for the country, and then 2 for the kind of verification, validity. Then we have the BLZ, and then we have the contact number. Right? This is not so important. It can also be applied to telephone number. Now, the problem is, how can we make it easier for users to copy-paste? Because sometimes they just want to, on a mobile phone, they just want to copy-paste the number, plug it in, and so it should work. I mean, it will work if it's empty spaces, but it will not work if it has separators, like country separators, right? Do you understand the problem? It's really simple. Like, seriously. It really is. So how can we make it better? Any ideas? I mean, what we want in the end is that the user can simply copy-paste anything, be it IBAN number or the phone number, paste it in for example, in the online banking application, and then it just will work without the software complaining about the incorrect formatting. No, if it's just, okay, we could do that, but also if it's just simple text. I mean, let's say you have a simple text where you just, have the separators or you have the empty space. Okay, the excitement already faded away. That's okay, because it's actually really simple. I'm wondering why many people don't use it. I mean, this is not beautiful HTML, obviously, but, if somebody copy-pasted, because, the empty spaces and the separators are generated via, CSS, basically, you will not copy-paste the wrong characters. Really simple. Also, really simple for online banking, right? Or phone numbers, if you want to, have a special formatting, let's say for, having brackets or having a hyphen in between, you can just plug it in and, copy-paste and you're done. And seriously, that's really simple. I mean, we're going to go way worse than that. All right. Okay, the next one, okay? It's going to be more exciting, trust me, at some point. So here's the problem. Broken images do not look particularly spectacular, right? They look quite broken, well, because they're broken images, for God's sake. So is there any way to improve the experience by changing the styling, but only if images are actually broken? If the images are, can be displayed, then you just display them. Can we change the styling without JavaScript if images are broken? You can style the alt text, you can set the background color on that. You deserve a little chocolate. That's okay, but we're getting somewhere at this point. I mean, I have to provide who was it? All right. Okay, so we can do this, but we can do a bit more than that. Yes? Okay, so you can put the image in on a div, and the div has a background. So if actually image cannot be loaded, the users will see the background. Yes, that works sweet, even dirtier than I thought, but yes, it does work, right? Okay, so the idea is to do the same thing, but put the background image on the before. Now, this is interesting, because normally this is what we're getting, right, in most browsers. The problem is, well, can we make it better? Well, yes, because if you look into the spec, and the spec is a fantastic reading material for your evenings. You should definitely go and read specs in the evenings. It's great. You find a lot of interesting stuff in there. It's like a mystery. You never know what you end up with. The image element is a replaced element according to the spec. It's an element whose appearance and dimensions are defined by external resource. So pseudo-elements and pseudo-classes should not be applicable to those elements. So have you ever tried to style an image or add something to the image using image semicolon before or after? It just won't work if the image can be displayed. If the image cannot be displayed, everything is going to be displayed as we want, with elements that we want to add before the element and after the element. So you can misuse it in many different ways just by defining or designing around this broken experience, replacing broken images with something a bit more fancy, maybe even with a link leading somewhere, right? And it's really simple. We just add before and after on the image and we're done, right? It doesn't work everywhere, okay? But it's still, progressive enhancement, so we don't lose anything at this point. For browsers that support it, it's a great advanced experience, which is great. All right? Okay, not much excitement. Let's get there. All right. So this is the problem that many people encounter a lot. Right? So we like fluid typography. We like when type kind of rescales up and down with responsive design, because then we can create these wonderful, beautiful experiences that work both on small screens and on large screens. That's wonderful. And very often we might end up, using many breakpoints just to adjust the font size in these breakpoints. But we can also use calc, right, in combination with the viewport units, VH, VW, Vmin, and Vmax. And that kind of works pretty well, right? So we could do something like this, where we can just set the font size being kind of dependent on VW, which means that the bigger the screen becomes at this point in width, then we're kind of adding in a little bit portion of the viewport to the font size so it will scale up beautifully, right? This is great because it will scale up and it will scale down, but it doesn't give us a real sense of control because it can become very, very small, it can become very, very large. But what if we wanted to grow in the specific boundaries, let's say? Or more specifically, what if we want to have something like a proper modular scale that actually grows up and down according to that scale, not according to just 1% of the viewport width, but according to that scale? That's kind of difficult. Now, this is what we can do today. That's really simple, and it's not that, I think that most of you have seen this before. That's not a big deal. So depending on the viewport width and height, we can change the font size using calc, right? That's pretty cool, and that's great. But this is not good enough. We should be getting better than this, because we want to use modular scale a lot of times. So all of the headings will kind of grow and become smaller according to that scale. So fundamentally, it all boils down to this simple problem. If we wanted to choose a font size of 16 pixels at a screen resolution of 400 pixels, and then transition to 24 pixels at a resolution of 800 pixels, we could, or we can't, do it without a breakpoint, right? So you want to move from 16 pixels to 24 slowly and beautifully between 400 pixels and 800 pixels, right? How would you do this? Without JavaScript. No JavaScript is allowed in this session, all right? Sorry?
There's a post-CSS plugin.
Okay, you can use post-CSS for it, obviously, but with simple, natural, low-fat CSS.
You can use calc. I use it every day, so
okay.
You can use calc to render off all the stuff between, and then you send a breakpoint max with 400, stay at 16, and over that stay at 24.
Okay.
And between them you calculate this with some magic stuff.
So
yes, it looks like that exactly.
it's pretty good actually. I don't throw it like this all the time. I throw more like, properly. Everybody's around, so it's close. Yeah, in fact, it's actually quite simple. Like there is a little formula they can use, and if you think about it, it looks crazy and totally annoying and strange, right? It uses calc, of course, but most importantly, the intuition behind it is the following. So here, you've got you got the difference between the maximum screen size and minimum screen size. This is where you want to transition. Here, you're defining the rest of the available space over which you want to transition, and here, defining how strongly it should be kind of growing or becoming smaller over time, but just by having a difference between maximum font size and minimum font size. And this serves as the minimum font size for you. So it's never going to be smaller than 16 pixels, and it's going to grow just according to that scale that you had defined, or that proportion that you had defined, right? Okay, I don't see a lot of excitement here. So most of you do, front-end stuff most of the time, right? Okay. I mean, when I discovered this was really like a game changer for me. It was like a really big deal. So keep using it like every single time, all the time. It's really cool. And it's not me who came up with this. It was Mike. And he published an article on Smashing about it. So you just define the min width, the max width, and the screen sizes, and you're pretty much done. You put it down in the formula, and you write it in your CSS for a selector, for a heading or whatever, and then you're really done. No breakpoints needed at all at this point. Well, you have to define the boundaries, but no media queries are needed at all. You just plug it in calc, it's going to work eternally. This is really good stuff. Seriously, this is really good stuff. So you end up in the end with fluid modular scale headings for free, without JavaScript involved. It's not like I hate JavaScript, just to be clear. I just don't particularly like it. It's not the same thing, trust me. All right? So this is cool. This is pretty good and nice. And we actually published an article about it. And calc is well supported, as you of course know. But this is not good enough. This is not good enough because it's not only one variable that we want to change. I mean, one thing is the font size, but we also want to adjust the line height dynamically as well. Because as we know from typography, the bigger the line length, the bigger the line height should be as well, and the other way around too. So we kind of want this kind of experience, right? The smaller the font size, or the smaller the line length, the smaller the line height. The bigger the line length, the bigger the font size, the bigger the line height. So this is what we kind of want. I mean, obviously not in this way. The line height at the upper boundary is way too big. But this is kind of where we want to go, where we want to come. And in the end, it's actually kind of the same story, and again, the same calc thing, where we have to define the minimum line height and, of course, the maximum line height, because at some point it just gets crazy. So if we're defining normal, like a regular line height being 1.3, which is kind of something that we probably start with usually, and then we maybe end up with 1.5 or 1.6 at some point. Again, we want to transition within a certain breakpoint from 1.3 to 1.5, according to the scale and according to the font size growth as well. Well, you know how it's going. You just plug it in this little formula, which does exactly the same thing, so you don't have to be fully crazy about it. It's actually exactly the same thing. This is a range where we're transitioning. Right? So let's say we have like 35 minus 21. That gives us the full range of our paragraph's width, right? Then here we're defining the space that is left, available, still left. Here we're defining how strongly it should be growing in terms of the line height. And then we're setting the minimum line height on 1.3. And we're done. And in the end, you end up with really beautiful type, where both the font size and the line height and the line length kind of control themselves automatically without even single media query. Okay, it's not dirty and it's not a hack, but it's pretty cool, seriously, right? All right, so that's pretty fancy. And you can apply it to every single project, right? All right, I know what you think. This is going to be a tough 1 hour. Well, maybe we can talk about some fun stuff then. So what's the deal with emoji? Right? Now, well, first of all, there are no emojis, because in Japanese there is no plural, so it's emoji in plural, right? So it's kind of one of those facts that always keep driving me nuts. So, what's the deal with them? It's like, you have this weird feeling when somebody opens a bracket and forgets to close it in the text. I get so annoyed by that. If somebody opens a quotation mark and then doesn't close it, I'm like, Some, something is seriously wrong in this world. This can't be right, right? So we have to kind of fix it because everybody likes emoji, but not everybody knows how to use emoji. And also, I mean, we know how to plug them in, but technically speaking, what are they actually in the first place? Can we style an emoji? Can we change an emoji with JavaScript? Or can we use an emoji icon set as a replacement for icon fonts and SVG? Have you ever tried to manipulate emoji in your interface? Well, maybe you should, because it's a lot of fun. So if you look back and think about what emoji is, you'll find lots of very interesting things about emojis. More specifically, you'll find very interesting emojis, like this one, which is, I kid you not, clockwise, rightwards, and leftwards open circle arrows with circled one overlay, also known as U1F502, or these are the different writing ways of writing it in CSS or in HTML or in JavaScript. Right? There are more interesting ones. Yeah, it's not that interesting. There are more interesting ones, like person raising both hands in celebration, also known as Festivus Miracle emoji, which I found pretty remarkable, right? So, this is something for us to know. And I have some favorite emojis, like most of you do. These are one of my favorite ones. No, that's not true. These are my favorite ones, but that's still okay. And in fact, I tried to actually test how emojis perform in usability tests. You know what? People really like emoji. They really do. It's unbelievable. So remember the mock-ups that Andrew Clark showed today in the first session? Well, I decided to test them in usability test and just plugged in emojis whenever I could. Not because I like emojis, but because to test. It's fun, right? So I plugged them in here for membership and in here for articles. Membership with a circus emoji because I couldn't find a better one, right? And it was so ridiculous because people kept clicking on them and clicking on them and clicking on them instead of reading the article. Because everybody likes emoji, apparently. So I thought, well, maybe we should do more with emoji, right? Including my favorite emoji, which is a lollipop, right? It's just so colorful, it's so beautiful, right? So people kept clicking on it. Now, it was really, really weird. So emojis are kind of important. I mean, we should not underestimate their importance. The question is, from a technical background, what can we do with them? Now, we can go crazy and do some, things like what Glenn does. He uses emojis a lot. Emoji. Like many emoji. And you can use, them for class names and things like that. That works pretty well, actually. Debugging is a bit more difficult. Because if you start debugging, yeah, so, but of course, this is probably not going to be his actual code. But it does work pretty well, right? So that means that we can actually use them very much like any other symbols, which is really great. So what are emoji after all? Now, emoji are very simply said colored glyphs which were added to Unicode 6.0 in 2010, which is why they're kind of relatively new, right? They are depicted in the spec as a description like the one I showed before, like the rightwards, leftwards, whatever, but the exact appearance of emoji is not specified. It's not really defined. So different manufacturers, hardware manufacturers, can choose how to design them. You can think about it very much like typefaces, where you can actually style every single letter individually, right? There is a problem with that. People like emoji, and they use emoji a lot, right? These are all the same emoji, which are perceived very differently depending on what platform you are using, right? And there is, in fact, an academic research where they studied the impact of that emoji on different groups of people. Some people think that this emoji is negative, others think it's very positive, and others just don't care, right? But it's really interesting because if you actually look into emojis and how they perform on different platforms, you will see that there is more or less misunderstandings happening depending on the emoji. So if you at some point want to use an emoji in your interface, you might want to look into this research. Because that icon, the green or whatever it is, with the bigger spikes, right, is the one that's actually misunderstood most of the time. I'm not sure which one I'm showing, this one, right? The one with the tears, it's incredible. And there is a very nice paper on this, which I highly recommend you to read, from University of Minnesota, right? So that brings us to our interesting question. So, all right, now we know that emoji are Unicode code points. So we can create a font with the emojis that we need in our interface and override platform-specific designs because they have inconsistencies to avoid inconsistencies. And this is exactly what Twitter did, right? When we just have to create like 800 emoji or so. They actually created 800 emojis or so which are now really consistently styled across all platforms. So when their users are using emojis, they're going to be styled the same way or everywhere where Twitter applications are running, right? Or Twitter is running. And internally, there are strings represented as in UTF-16. So each code point can be represented by one or more 16-bit code units. Some emoji, horrible, use only one code units. Others too, right? And not all of them are the same, because some of them can be surrogates and could combine different emoji, and the others not. So for example, this one returns 4, this one returns 4, this one returns 11, just because it's a surrogate, right? This kind of contains of different ones. So this is why you end up with this weird platform sometimes showing emoji in weird way. So for example, flags are usually represented on all the platforms as the abbreviations, like CA, for example, for Canada. And if it's a surrogate, you will see 2 icons, or 2 emoji instead of 1, and so on, all right? So what happens then when you actually try to style it, right? So what if you say, I want the emoji to be styled in this font and then sans serif? Can you actually use Comic Sans to style an emoji? Have you tried? Okay, not many people try. All right, so actually it will look up the glyph in the font. That will not find it. It will actually fall back to the fallback font. In this case, it will be sans serif, which means it's going to be Helvetica or Arial. Then the fallback doesn't have it either. That's a problem. So browser will try to figure out what the hell it's supposed to do with this weird character. And then it will eventually realize it's probably a weird code point from maybe emoji family. So it will look up locally of what platform has it or what is available. And then it will actually get the emoji font and then actually start render it. So it means that you can actually start, design your own emoji set, potentially, and pull it out and let users use it consistently. And there's a very nice article about it by Monica, which I highly recommend you to read. So that's pretty cool. All right. Whew, okay. Next, this is fun. So we have a problem. The problem is called responsive email and Gmail. Now, Gmail doesn't understand media queries. Can we make Gmail understand media queries? Yes. Who said that? Okay. With
But you can just use one breakpoint. There was one time an article with, I think was the, not Beastie Boys, it was the, sorry, the name from the group.
Okay, it looks like you know what you're saying.
Yes.
So you had a chocolate
With
already, so you're not allowed to continue now. That's okay. And you're not allowed to raise hands anymore because it's then no more fun for other people. I'm sorry. I will give you an apple later. So they're well upstairs too, by the way. No, I'm not saying anything. Right. So the problem is, again, yes, we can make it work. It's just going to be very, 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 very dirty. When I think about email in general, this is like going back in time. Like seriously going back in time. To a time when things used to be much different, when HTML and CSS and no JavaScript is allowed anyway in email were different. So this is what it usually looks like still today, and it's actually pretty horrible. So some developers are forced to be really creative when it comes to designing and building responsive emails. So like really creative. So is there actually any professional email designer or developer here in the room? Or somebody who, how many people have to deal with responsive emails? Quite a lot. Okay, so we'll have to bring you over there next to the end of the session and hug you, because this is really, really, really tough stuff. So the problem is you have to be creative. So for example, you know that images are not displayed, CSS support is, and JavaScript support is not available most of the time. So what do you do with it? Well, you have to use tables in HTML email anyway, so you can just style tables just by using background color on the tables, on TDs. That's great. However, what if your boss comes to you and tells you that there is a very important button? Maybe it's a logo, or maybe it's a button, or maybe it's an important image. And that image has to be displayed, whether images can be displayed or will be displayed in Gmail or not. It's just important that this image has to be displayed everywhere, no matter what happens, right? And it has to be done by yesterday, all right? So what will you do about it? You can use a table for it. Yes. Very good, Vasilis. Yes. So I saw some developers turning a bitmap image of that button for pixel by pixel, 1 pixel in the bitmap, is going to be turned into TD with 1 times 1 pixel, background colors colored in that color of that pixel. Yes, this is the world that we're living in, my friends. And this is kind of tough, right? But you still can do a lot of stuff. For example, you can actually, I mean, if you have to deal with tables, obviously, you can actually turn 4 columns into 2, or you can even float things. You can do everything if you want to. It's just because normally, of course, TR, TD, they're all table, well, TD is table cell. You can turn it into display block and just change the width, for example, and then you have a full width container basically packed. That's easy. Also, if you want to switch columns, right? Obviously we can do it with Flexbox, but not in email, as you probably know, right? So in that case, we can actually use display table properties to change the order. Because if you look into the spec, you will find some very interesting, next one, you'll find some very interesting properties. Table, table caption, table header group, table footer group. However, they all live in the specific place. So table header always lives above the table, table footer always lives below the table, and table caption somewhere in between, I think below the table and table footer. So you can reorder and reshuffle elements, even in Outlook, if you absolutely have to. However, we're not talking about Outlook, we're talking about Gmail. And Gmail is a bit more complicated in that degree. What if you wanted to move from 4 columns to 2 columns on Gmail? So as, if obviously nobody resizes window like we do, but if a user is on a small screen on an Android device, they should be getting 2 columns. On a large screen on Gmail on desktop, they should be getting 4 columns within 1 email, right? That's really hard to do. Actually, we can actually simplify it from 2 columns to 1 column. Maybe it's easier then. We can do it by combining calc, width, min width, and max width in a very strange way. Can you tell me what is going to win if you define a box with a width of 320 pixels, min width 480 pixels, and max width 160 pixels? So who thinks that at this point width is going to win, that the box is going to be 320? Not many people. Who thinks that min width is going to win? Not many. Who thinks that max width is going to win? A few more. And who is undecided or wants to leave now? Okay, some people. Right, so this is very interesting because if you read the spec, which is a great evening lecture for you to read every morning, every night, you will find very interesting things happening. First of all, it depends, right? This is so, if apparently, like one thing we understand, it's pretty clear. If the width value is greater than the max width, then max width is going to win because max width constrains the width, right? It constrains the growth of the container, which makes total sense. However, if the min width value is greater than the width or max width values, then min width is going to win. Okay, let's try it again. If the min width value is greater than the width or max width, then min width is going to win. We can abuse it in so many different ways. It's really, really nice. So let's say we want to build a 2-column layout, and we have a breakpoint at 480 pixels in Gmail. Right now we cannot use media queries because we can't. So what can we do? Well, we do it in this very simple way. Maybe I should go this way because I was there already. So we define the min width being 50%, max width 100%, and width is the calc of just 480 pixels minus 100% times 480. Why the hell would you want to do that, right? So again, we want to have 2-column layout above the breakpoint and 1-column layout below the breakpoint. Our breakpoint is 480 pixels. So if we define min width 50%, it's kind of basically a 2-column desktop version, if you think. We'll get to it in a second. Max width 100% is basically 1-column mobile version, and the width is this magical formula that just works. So obviously 100% is the width of the parent element, right? That's clear. Now our goal for every single stage before the breakpoint and after the breakpoint is to create a value for width, kind of generate a value for width, which is bigger than our max width or smaller than our min width, so that either one of those properties is going to be applied. That's, this is like, yes, this is bad. Yeah, but you can do that, right? So what does it mean? So let's say we have a breakpoint 480 pixels. At this point, we can say, okay, we're going to use this little thing. Min width is going to be 50%, right? So it's 250 pixels. Max width is 500 pixels, because we have parent of 500 pixels. And the width is minus 9,600 pixels. Have you ever seen a width of that? Width? No, you didn't, right? So what happens here? Well, min width is going to win because if the min width is greater than the width or max width, min width is going to win. Okay, I don't see much excitement here today at all, seriously, people. But the problem is, okay, so what if we are below the breakpoint? Well, at this point, the min width is going to be 200, the max width is going to be 400, and the width is 38,400 pixels, right? And because the max width restrains the width, we're going to end up with max width winning, and we have a breakpoint. Right? And it actually works just like charm. It's not my technique, actually. I linked to it in 2 slides or so. But it's really, really quite amazing. Now, talking about email, can we do more than this? And the answer is yes. What if you want to have an interactive, live Twitter wall working in your email when users receive it? I told you it's going to be bad, and I got popcorn for me. Okay, that's really good. All right. You don't let me eat popcorn, damn it. All right, it's like, it's fun for me. So what is happening there? It actually was built for the email design conference because they wanted to show off. And the thing that they do is really, really cool. Because when you open the email, what's going to happen is they're pinging the server regenerates the GIF, animated GIF, every 2 seconds, with live tweets plugged in, and it's clipped inside of the email, and then they animate it again using transition and CSS. So it feels like it's real, and it's actually kind of real. It's just, not JavaScript. That's it. But if you have to make it work, you can make everything work, right? And it actually works pretty well, I'll say. So if you do have to deal with these kind of things, right? So there are 2 tools, 2 websites, responsive email patterns with all kind of patterns that you could use. For example, if you want to use media object or whatever, things like that, responsive media object. That's really cool. And also responsive email resources with templates and things like that you can also use. And this is a technique by Remy, which is really, really interesting, right? Okay, next. Ready for the next one? What if you want, this is a very common one. What if you want to use a full width element in a fixed width container, right? For example, you want some content to extend beyond the boundaries of the container, having things like that. Have a column with the text, right? And you also have an image which should be living kind of outside. So we have some art direction going on here, right? Now, the lazy way would be to close the div, have the image, then reopen the div and get alive, right? Can we do better than this? Yeah, whatever. All right. Yes. Very good. Right. So the answer is really simple because for me personally, whenever I encounter a problem, the main thing you can do is try 3 things. Well, first of all, accordion because accordions are just great. Second of all, flexbox because flexbox is just great. And third of all, calc and viewport units. They just work everywhere for everything. So what we want to achieve here is definitely not this, right? When we have a div and then we have, wait a second. Then we actually plug in an image and then we reopen the div. That's not cool. That's not what we want. Now, to release our child element from its parent container, we need to know how much space there is between the container edge and the viewport edge on both sides, right? So kind of pull on one side and we can pull out on the other side. Now, what is this space exactly? Well, if you think about it, for every single edge, for the left edge, let's say, it's half the viewport width minus half the container width. Right? Just think about it. It kind of makes sense. And it's the same for the right edge, right? The same story. So we just plug it in and we're done, really. So we still have the image, and we just use margin left calc minus 50% viewport width plus 50% of the parent, and the same for the right, and we're done. Right? That makes sense? Right? The only problem is, as it always is with viewport units, why does this happen? Well, it happens for a very simple reason. When the height or width, again, if you're reading the spec, you'll find lots of very interesting things in the evening, during the evening lecture. When the height or width of the initial containing block is changed, they are scaled accordingly. Note that the initial containing block size is affected by the presence of scroll bars on the viewport. Or in other words, the VH or VW do not account for the scroll bar, which is kind of a problem. So we have to fix it just by, of course, adding overflow X hidden. And then it works. Yes. Or we don't have to go this way, and then actually it does work everywhere, pretty much, where calc is supported, and supported almost everywhere. And the other alternative is if you don't want to rely on calc because you need to support who, in that case you have to do the same thing with left, right, margin left, and margin right. It actually works the same story, but VW really helps in here, right? So that's pretty cool. Here's a nice article about it too. All right. Okay, ready for the next one? Who is like, okay, we have to ask at this point. So level of happiness. Right? So I do this front-end stuff, and you're sitting here thinking, there is beer waiting on the top. Why am I here? Right? I have this, somebody's like a neighbor on the left or on the right, and I'm stuck. So if you feel like leaving, that's okay. You can come back later. I don't mind, seriously. But in general, how comfortable you're feeling with this stuff at this point, just to know how dirty I should go. So no. Now, on the level from 1 to 10, right? Because normally, if you want to ask people about something, like this is how psychology works, instead of asking direct question, you ask something related, which kind of, maybe goes in the same direction. On the level from 1 to 10, on your happiness scale, where 1 is today is the worst day of my life, and 10 is today is the best day of my life, who would put themselves between 0 and 4 now? Come on, it's a talk about front end. Just don't forget this, right? 0, 4, okay. 2, 3, okay. Who is between 5 and 7? Okay, more people. Who is somewhere at 8 or 9? Okay, is somebody at the 10? That's very scary. All right. Okay, that's not, okay, I'll just keep going. Okay, so, okay, I'll try. My goal is for you all to reach 9 at the end of this day. So we'll see how it goes. So here's another one. So we've got tables. Well, we're used to tables at this point because we had to deal with email. So how do you make sure that in the multi-column table, both a row and the column are highlighted on hover and on tab? Highlighting the current row is easy. We can just use tr hover, right? But what about the column? This is what we want. We want to tap on 22 and both the column and the row to be highlighted without JavaScript. Just because we can. So nobody wants chocolate anymore? Sorry? Yes, we can add pseudo classes. Here we go. All right, so in fact, the thing that is really magical about CSS is, of course, pseudo elements and pseudo classes, because we can apply them everywhere, right? So this is what we can do. We create huge pseudo elements on TDs with a negative top value of half of that value. Then we hide these pseudo elements with overflow hidden on the table, so it's it doesn't appear. And then we use negative Z index to keep it below the content, so we can copy paste the content, and then we can make all cells focusable and focus them on touch start. And that's pretty much it, right? So the idea is, well, here we've got the table overflow hidden on the table, so it's not, the entire background isn't showed up. Then we're using tr hover to actually, hover to show the background color on the row. And then we do td, we use the after pseudo element on the pseudo class hover on td, and then we position his huge pseudo element with height of 10,000 pixels and width 100% because we know the width of the table. And then we position it on the left, and then we actually position it in the middle. So because we have 10,000 pixels, so we want to make sure that the entire thing stays in put. And then we use background color, current color, just because we can. And then we use Z index -1 to push the content to the edge so we can copy paste it. And that kind of works everywhere. And you can also, of course, apply it to TH as well. It doesn't have to be only TR. So when I saw it for the first time, pseudo element applied to pseudo class, I literally freaked out and cried a little bit. Just a little bit. Right? So you can, seriously, it's really, really nice. It's really cool. All right? So that's nice. Okay, what else have I got? All right. Now we have to talk about one thing that kind of drives me nuts a lot of times. So right now, even on Smashing, we have this problem when we want to nest one link inside of another link, and I know that I actually covered it last year. Now, it's really interesting, because what if you have a side note or footnote in the article? So you want the entire excerpt to be linked, but you also want the excerpt to contain links that it actually has, things like that. So you have a few paragraphs, right? And this entire paragraph is a link, but this link should still be the link. So you kind of have a link inside of the link, right? I mean, the problem is you can't, can you have nested links in HTML? No, you shouldn't. This is the right answer, I think. But the boring way to do it would be to just close the tag and reopen the tag and close the tag and reopen the tag. And we could totally do that, and it's probably okay. But you could also do something else. This is what's going to happen, right? If you actually try to nest a link inside of another link, it's just not going to work. Because the browser is going to assume that you're a stupid developer and you forgot to, to close the first link, so it's going to reopen, to close it for you, and it's going to keep the second link intact, but it's not going to reopen the link, right? So you are going to end up with a part of that paragraph not being a link, which is kind of not what you want. So what do you do? Yes? You use the object tag. Why object tag? I mean, you don't have to use the object tag, obviously, because, of course, you can also position a link absolutely on top of your existing paragraph, but it's even worse. And then it's not going to be, well, maybe it will be responsive in a way, but this is kind of really dirty. Now, object tag is like SVG, or like embed, or like iframe. They kind of, for the browser, they exist on a different planet. It's like they don't even want to touch what's inside, because it's so horrible. So they're like, whatever is inside, whatever is an object, I'm going to live with it. Let's just move on, and I'm going to not, just keep it as is. So it pretty much does what it's supposed to do, right? However, of course, it doesn't work in IE8 and below. If you want to make it work in IE8 and below, you can use conditional comments inside object, which is probably the most horrible thing I ever said in my life. But you still can do this, and it actually works pretty well. And if you don't like it, you can actually still use the position absolute technique or look at kittens, because they're also fun. All right? So that's okay. And also, you can actually use object for one very specific and very useful reason. Have you ever embedded an SVG file using the object tag? I mean, you might ask yourself, what the hell is going on now? Why would you do this? I mean, we know that there are many ways, actually, I think at least 9 documented ways of how we can embed SVG files on a page. And there are some advantages, disadvantages in each option. Normally, we just go ahead and say, just plug it in, as we always do. Image source, image SVG, or as a background image. The problem is if you want to change the color of path or the thickness of path, for example, in your SVG file of polygons, it's not going to work this way, because if you embed it this way, again, it behaves very much like embedding an iframe. You cannot change the styling of a link inside of an iframe on your page. I mean, maybe you can. I don't think so. But it's going to be really, really dirty, right? So it's kind of the same. It's contained area, so to say. So it blocks access to SVG paths in CSS. We cannot change the thickness, for example, or color of the SVG parts using CSS then. We can use inline SVG, which probably most of us are doing, or data URIs, of course. The problem is, well, then we have lost the caching, because it's kind of, we just copy-paste the entire SVG in HTML and it leaves there, but we don't have the caching, which is kind of a problem. So if, and I'm just proposing here, if you embed the SVG file using the object tag, you get the best of both worlds in a way, because if you embed it this way, first of all, it can provide a fallback for browsers not supporting it, right? So you don't have to, provide fallback for PNG, like specifically with Modernizer or whatever it supports. What you can do there is, if you have CSS styling, the hover effects, right, inside of that SVG file, then just going to work. And the entire thing is going to be in cache. I'm just saying, all right? So the only thing you have to keep in mind is that when you embed your CSS, like for example, you have a component and then you have a component CSS, right, which refers to that SVG, it needs to live inside of SVG, so you can refer to like a separate component.css file, but you need to kind of embed it using XML style sheet syntax. That's the only thing. And you cannot, of course, still access the path from your global CSS file, right? You can't do this, but inside of that SVG file, you still can. And this is something that we cannot do with anything else. Ever. This is why Object Tag is so amazing. Okay, I got it already. Tough crowd, very tough crowd. All right, you know, just for you to know, we are at slide number 137. I have time. I have nowhere to go. I mean, we have the party coming. We can actually get drinks and come back here. That would be even better. So, yeah, maybe we do 3 and then 3 more, or 4 more, or 5, and then people who want to leave can actually leave. I mean, I know it's not comfortable to be stuck. So here's a problem that also comes a lot, right? So if you want to add a background to inline text for headings, but the text should be padded along both the left and the right edge of each line. Now, the left and right paddings are not a problem because they will be applied only on the first line, but the rest is a problem because the padding is not going to be in here. So we're going to end up with padding in here at the end of the paragraph, and no padding in between. You can, of course, turn it into a big display block element, right? But maybe you don't want to. So what the hell do you do to get Icelandic chocolate? Yes? I can really hardly hear you, to be honest. If you could come here.
You had text indent and padding. One of them is negative.
Okay,
I remember some kind.
Right, so you could use text indent and padding. So you can just indent into kind of with a negative text indent to the left and then generate some padding on both sides. Yes. The simpler way for it is to just add a box shadow on both sides. That just works, right? Okay, next. But I mean, seriously, it's like one line of CSS and you have nothing to do. You just add padding on both sides, on the left and the right, and it's pretty much that nobody will notice. I won't tell anyone. Don't worry. All right? Okay, so here is a more complicated one, which I think is also quite important. So you want to implement baseline written. We know how it works. Now all designers come to us and they want us to build perfect vertical written. So this is kind of tricky in a way sometimes, especially, I mean, you can of course use, Twitter framework and whatever to make it work, but can we actually make it a bit simpler for us? Well, this is what we often try to do, and this is where we're failing. So usually we try to put the lines just between, just between the lines, so it sits in the middle nicely. However, if we actually get rid of this idea and try to put the quotes or whatever, the text and the buttons, actually living, not them, but actually the text living on the lines, not between the lines, but on the lines, then things can be done much, much easier. So here's the deal. Now, often we define a common line height, or it's multiple, that's used for all elements, including the paddings and margins, and sometimes we also take border width in consideration, right? So what if we try to align to the baseline instead? So that all type, regardless of its size, lies in the same grid line, right? The only thing we need to do then is to calculate the offset, which we need to push the text a little bit down so it will sit on the line. And of course, will depend on the line height. So again, coming back here, the thing we need to do is we have to look into what is the size that is sitting on the actual line. What is this difference? Not the line height. How much space do we need to put the text below? So by default, browsers center the cap height, which is the height of a capital letter above the baseline, between grid lines. So we can shift it by half the difference between line height and cap height, very much like we did with the first example, where we actually pulled the image on the left edge and on the right edge. It's actually the same story, right? So to determine the cap height, we just need to fiddle with offset value to actually really sit it down on the line. So in our source file, we're going to have a few parameters. We're going to have a line height, we're going to have a font stack because we might change it depending on the viewport. And then we have different font sizes in here, and cap heights, which we have to measure on their own in CodePen or whatever. If you want to, I can actually send more details later. In the end, you will end up with a nice mixin anyway. So in the end, you just need to make sure that it actually sits on the right plot, right? And you actually do this, use this formula, again, which is, which is this one. We just shifted by half the difference between line height and cap height. Okay. Right. Oh, it's a wrong slide deck, I'm sorry. And what we do then, once we have calculated the offset that we need to push, we just need to make sure, that we apply this offset reliably, because if we push things down, then of course the margin at the bottom will be pushed down as well, so we cannot start on the same line. So we need to compensate for it. And we need to do it by combining margins. So what happens if you have collapsed margins? You have a margin bottom and you have margin top. A margin bottom in one paragraph and margin top on the next paragraph in CSS. There's a collapsing thing happening, right? However, if you look into the spec in the evening, you'll find some very interesting things happening there. Namely, collapsing works differently with positive and negative margins. If you have two positive margins, the bigger one is going to win. If you have two negative margins, the lower, the one which is more negative, is going to win. If you have one positive and one negative, then the margins will sum up. We can abuse it in so many different ways, right? Because if we actually define the margin top being the offset and margin bottom being the negative offset, the same thing, they're going to be added, so you're going to be sitting on exactly on the same line that you want to sit on the grid, which is just what we want. Right? The only thing, of course, that happens then, if an element doesn't have a border, no padding at all, and we kind of add margins, and its first child has a margin, that margin will flow out of the parent. So again, here we also need to use overflow hidden. But then it just sits where it's supposed to be. And it's just one mixin that actually takes care of it. No JavaScript is necessary here, of course, as well. All right? Okay. Okay, the last thing I have to show you, which is because it's really dirty. And it's really, really bad. We know the checkbox hack in CSS, right? It's not a good idea to use it, right? So because sometimes what you end up with, you don't have JavaScript support like in email, for example, but you do want to replicate interactivity by maintaining the state. So the way we're going to do it, usually, we use a connected label and the checkbox input to control another element, for example, a div, right? We hide the checkbox, right? We still keep the label. You click on the label, we're changing the state, toggle on, off, right? This kind of thing. Now, this is how it usually would work. We have a label, we have an input, we have a div, right? We're kind of hiding one of them. We're hiding the input type checkbox in here, and we still keep the label somewhere. So if somebody clicks on the label, we're going to toggle the state. So we can change the color, for example, background color and so on, like binary change of state. We know this stuff. That's nothing too groundbreaking. However, here is a task for you. I challenge you to build this. You think, well, whatever, not a big deal. Shopping cart, whatever, not a big deal. Lightbox, carousel, color, selecting color, buttons, things. In an email. Can you do this? Can you build a fully functional shopping cart in an email? This is a screenshot, or a video actually, taken from an email. If you can, you will get the full box. Seriously. Anybody? How would you even approach this? I mean, let's take it slow, all right? So what the hell is happening? Well, it's a regular shopping cart experience, right? Think about, just quantity selector, right? You want, for example, not one t-shirt, but 2 or 3 or 4, right? So you have to increment, and you also have to change the price dynamically. How would you do it? Because as you know, in email, you don't have JavaScript support at all, like at all. You have a very limited amount of CSS support, but you have HTML, right?
Maybe create
You could animate a GIF, yes, of course. No, but you want people, so your goal is to go ahead and build an email where people can actually really select everything and then click a button, buy, and the entire thing is going to be processed and they basically bought an item. Is it possible? Yes? Yes?
Maybe pre-rendering the prices, and then when you click it, it's checkbox checked, and then
well, you could pre-render the prices, of course, but the thing is you have to combine kind of multiple things. Pre-rendering probably won't work. I mean, you could generate an image, of course, with heat map, but it's, yeah. Checkbox does work, and the way it's going to work is very similar to a very famous artifact of human-machine interaction, which is this. Are you familiar with it? From good old days. Does anybody know what it is? Yeah. So what is it then? Well, it's a punch box or whatever it was called, where you would actually punch, and depending on where the state is, it's kind of depending on the positions of these holes, right? You kind of have a certain state, very much like binary in a way, but not quite. So what if we move away from this towards something more beautiful and modern like this? Right? It's kind of the same thing in a way. You will have to maintain a state, right? So how can we actually nicely maintain this, or not so nicely, maintain the state? So there's lots of checkboxes or radio buttons in here. Now here's what we can do. Right, so we have a lot of input elements everywhere. We have a lot of labels placed strategically on the places where people can click on things. And this is going to be our CSS. So what are we going to do here? So we're just checking, is the first thing checked? Is the second thing checked? Or like, what is the state? Is it bought, not bought, not bought, size, and so on, price, and things, amount, and whatever. All things like the taxes, whatever. And then, check, all right. I'm going to style div as display block, for example. Or you can, of course, do whatever you want in here, right? So basically, it all depends on the state. You have the first state, then you're checking the second state, because it's a adjacent sibling selector, just goes from top to bottom, then eventually it's going to hit div 1, and this is what you probably want to style or change, depending on the state. Think about clicking on all of those toggles, and in the end, they end up producing some sort of a state, right? And you can manipulate the state later to create something like this, right? But this is not good enough, because this is only one simple thing. I mean, we can, of course, change the state, but how would you change the price dynamically based on what the user has selected in their email? Sorry? Content, yes, but you need to do multiplication and you don't have JavaScript. And you don't have calc, really. Well, to some degree you have, but not really. Of course, the answer is very simple. You're just using counters in CSS. And you increment counters whenever needed. And that's really not a big deal, actually. So here you've got in this shopping cart email checkout, which was produced by one guy from the UK. It's a company. They're actually doing like full-time this, by the way. 4 people, right? They produced this prototype, which really works, and it actually even works in Gmail. 117 radio buttons, 4 checkboxes, but with this, they were, without JavaScript, they were able to create multi-page layout, adding and removing products, edit quantity, color, and size, light boxes, see live calculation, selecting payment and delivery options, form validation in the email without HTML5 form validation, right? Fallback is just a regular email. Now, can you imagine how it could potentially work? It's ingeniously evil in so many different ways. Because if you think about it, I mean, obviously, it's this checkbox hack all the way. Like, all the way. Think about multi-page layout, right? They have, I don't know, 7 or 8 pages, which are all divs, which are controlled using the checkbox state, right? This little thing that I showed. This is one thing. Adding and removing products is used just using the counter resets of counter. So here I've got a counter reset for an amount or so, let's say. If something is checked, you just increment that counter, and you have many counters like that in your HTML email. And then in the end, you just, change it. That's it, right? Not a big deal. And then if the same thing happens with edit quantity, color, and size, Select payment and delivery, it's like a select drop-down more or less. It also uses the same checkbox technique, or hack, so to say. I don't remember how they did the form validation, but it's also quite weird in a way. And, you know, it kind of works. There is one little problem, though. If you want to build an entire shopping cart system in your email, you are going to hit some limitations, just so you to be aware of. In email clients, basically, we just need to make sure that they have support for checked and sibling selectors in CSS. That's it. And then you can have a fully functional shopping cart. But in email, file size is limited to 102 kilobyte. And in Gmail, CSS is limited to 12,000 characters, which is going to be a difficult problem. You might think, well, this is not a big deal. If you do this, this will be a big deal. Yes? Just for you to know. And you think, wait a second, this can't be true. It can't possibly work. Well, if you think about the support, it's better than you think, because 61% will have a fully interactive experience of users who are actually opening emails. Fully interactive experience where they can actually add things to the cart, including the quantity and the color selection and whatever, everything. It's just going to work like magic. The other 19% is going to have a limited experience. Not everything is going to work as expected, maybe. And then 20%, including, of course, Outlook and so on, they're just going to get a static image, static page. But because we're talking progressive enhancement anyway, this is going to be the first page in our checkout, so not a big deal. People just click on continue shopping or check out, and they are brought to a page. That's it. Sorry? Oh, I should go on the stage. Okay. And here you're getting kind of a bit more than that, right? When you can maybe kind of move between pages, but not have all the fancy whistles and bells. And then again, in most cases, you will have a perfectly fine experience, because most users are on kind of fancy devices these days. I mean, not most, but many people are, right? And Mark Robbins came up with this. I feel for him so. I mean, imagine you having to build something like this. Well, he loves it, right? But imagine you having to build it. That's pretty scary. All right. So, how are we doing today now? Still active? Actively ignited to get more or not? So, I'm going to have a break, right? For 2 minutes. If you feel like you have to leave, that's okay. I'm not going to. I will join you later for the beer as well. But I still have some slides to go through. So if you're really passionate about it, you better stay. If not, that's okay too. See, I'm not kidding, by the way.
Okay, so really, if you're thirsty and if you've had enough dirt, then go up, go drinking, go dancing, and
I think I need maybe like 30, 40 more minutes.
the rest of you can stay down here and enjoy the rest of this talk. So, if everybody who wants to listen to the next 6 hours of Vitaly's talk, the next largest session is starting right now.
It's not going to be that long. 30 minutes maybe.
Grab a seat, sit down and enjoy it.
All right? So it's going to be like maybe 20, 30 minutes. Don't worry, it's not going to be like 6 hours. I don't think so. I'm still getting cold. But I still have some things that we have to solve creatively. And they're not going to be as bad as the previous ones, I think. Now, this is also a very common one. Because we tend to have a lot of dynamic content on the site, be it advertising or anything else. So whenever the content is dynamically injected into the DOM, or when above the default CSS that critical CSS is plugged in, users actually see content jumping around. For example, imagine somebody following a link on Twitter to the comments, jumping right to the comments of a page. If you're using above the default CSS or critical CSS, they will see a lot of misorienting. I don't drink beer, but thank you. No.
So, do you want something else?
No, I'm fine. Thank you. I have water. That's cool. So they will see a lot of jumping around, because as you actually jump to the comments, you will see a lot of misorientation happening. So can we actually make it better or improve it? Because this is kind of the okay scenario still, right? We are loading, for example, The Verge, and then chuck, the content jumps in, because advertising kicks in, right? That's kind of a problem, but it's still acceptable in here. However, it can be much worse. What if you happen to have something like this as an experience? So at this point, you might just be lost. Because when you hit the page and then you start scrolling down and all of a sudden content jumps around, that's really, really annoying. So how would you fix it? Padding bottom for the ratio, yes. There is one other way of doing this. I mean, by the way, it's pretty bad chocolate, by the way. I mean, I was told it's really, really bad. So anybody? So you fix the layout first, or you paint the layout first, and then you add the content. So you kind of want to reserve the space. That's great if you know that you have a fixed width or height for that block. If it's an advertising unit, you know that. But what if you don't know what size you should be expecting? Embed the images. Well, you can use background image. There is another way. Which is actually really simple. I'm wondering why many people are not using it. So obviously, if we know the expected height of the block, we can just use min height to reserve space for it. That's obvious, right? This is not a big deal. Or we can also calculate, if we don't know quite for sure, we can calculate it with JavaScript on window early on and then write styles dynamically so this spot is going to be reserved. But what we could also use, always, if we don't know the exact width or height, we can always use a nice transition from the actual initial height to the final height. This is how it's going to work then. It's way better than actually jumping around. So here we've got it running on Braintree, right? And then you have a little transition where things just scrolling down a little bit, right? It doesn't feel obtrusive, it doesn't feel like it's jumping around, it just grows a little bit, which is perfectly fine. And to make it work, well, we need to start somewhere, and we can start with height 0, right? And then overflow hidden, and then we transition with the height towards 400 pixels. Right? That's really not such a big deal, but it can improve experience a lot sometimes. But then, of course, you also have something else, because we live in Switzerland. What if you have to translate an interface into many languages, and the length of words is unpredictable? What if you have things like this happening in your interface? Which is an actual word which exists in German language, by the way, for those of you who are coming from abroad. Is somebody willing to read it out loudly? Anybody? Wow, that's really impressive, I think. Very good, yes. Now, we don't want it to mess up our layout, obviously. So how can we fix it? How can we make it better? Well, first of all, this is probably what we want to have, but we can't have it properly. Because, well, if the hyphenation is supported at all, it's going to be supported for English language, but not for German for sure. So you're going to end up with the wrong hyphenation. What we probably can end up with, which is probably the best we can do, is this today. Or, of course, this. But this is just not cool, right? This is not helpful. So what properties would you use to make it work? Shy, okay, so we can use shy, this kind of the soft hyphen, but we would need to do it for every, before every hyphen, or, yes, before, for every word or so. We could use, that's interesting, we could use a marquee tag. No, I don't think so. Yes, I think no. So you need to, the thing is, you have to, if you test, and some people out there do testing, you will find out that one property is not good enough. You know, there's situations where sometimes you add a little bit of flexbox to your code, and then you realize it doesn't work what it's supposed to do, and then you add more flexbox to it, and it suddenly works. This is pretty much like it. So if one property isn't good enough, you just add another property, and then it works. So here you need to combine word break with hyphens to actually make it work, which including fallback for all the other browsers. So it's kind of solved for those of you who actually have to deal with things like that. All right? Yes, for languages. All right, so what else do I have here? Let's see. Just a moment. Now, what if you have a large photo that requires a transparent shadow, right? Or a drop shadow. So PNG is going to be too large in file size. If you have a landing page with a big image, it's going to be huge, so bad for performance. However, JPEG isn't good enough because if you compress it properly, the shadow, the gradient is going to look pretty bad. So imagine you have a nice slight drop shadow in here. So what do? Do you choose PNG, or do you use JPEG, or do you use something else? Yes, so Vasilis gets the second piece of a horrible. You can get an apple. No? Too bad. I have only one backup. Yes, so the way to do it would be for performance and for good quality. We need to separate into two parts. One of them is going to be JPEG. The other one is going to be the alpha channel for the cap, for the shadow. And then you pull them together on SVG using a mask, right? And then you plug it in your HTML and CSS as you would usually do, and you're pretty much done. And the best part is these ones together are 270 kilobytes or so, right? However, if you actually put a big JPEG on it or a big PNG, it's going to be way over 1 megabyte if it's a landing page, let's say. So just putting them in an SVG container is really helpful. However, it was really cool to see, just a few days after the article about this technique was published, somebody came up with this tool which allows you to upload a JPEG and upload the PNG, and it's going to convert everything into a SVG container, which contains both. This is how cool our community is, so it's pretty cool. All right? Okay, so what else do I got? Let's see. Okay, so how would you build this? It cannot be an animated GIF, obviously. Anybody? It's responsive too, by the way. Not that it matters, but just saying. I mean, this is really not hard. It's actually quite simple. Maybe even stupid. And then you animate it, and that's it, right? So you basically have 2 or 3 divs, and then you position them a little bit offset. You add some gradient to them, for example, or maybe just change the background using the clip properties, and animate the clip property, and you're done. Okay, no excitement anymore. Okay, all right. It's getting better and better. Let's talk Flexbox, because Flexbox is great. How would you build this? So you want to have you want to have the headlines centered, and you want to have like lines in the middle going left and right, and of course it has to be responsive as well. Sorry? What? Login? Maybe, I don't know. So, yes, so, huh?
Position absolute.
No position absolute, seriously? You cannot use position absolute for this, ever. A long time ago doesn't count. So, first of all, what works always, like all the time, is of course Flexbox. With Flexbox, we can position things like each of them could be a Flexbox going from left to right. You know how it goes. Of course, in Flexbox, we have a direction going from left to right. So by default, we don't have to specify it. And then we center in both ways. So this is why the lines are going to be in the middle. However, we have to draw the lines. And to draw the lines, we're going to use the before and after pseudo element in order to draw a line of a height of 1 pixel with a certain background. And then also we want to probably, maybe use flex basis for it or min width. And it should grow, right, with flex grow. So it's going to grow horizontally on both edges. And just to make sure that the text isn't hit, we're going to add the margin on the left or on the right, depending on where the text is, right? And yes, and it's actually fully responsive as well, of course. So it just does what it has to do. Okay, we talked about landing pages for a moment. There's one thing that's kind of important to know about landing pages. Very often, on the landing page, there is one image. and that image is really, really, really important. Has to come in quickly, has to be displayed right away as fast as possible, and it's more important than others. Right? Is there any way to optimize images beyond just regular image optimization with PNG and JPEGs? Maybe we can do more than this. And of course we can. Now there are a few dirty techniques to optimize images, which most people, including Tim Kadlik, would never say are right, but they work. So let's say we have this image which is quite wide. It has 1,600 pixels in width, and it's 970 kilobyte when just output on Photoshop. We can bring it down to 213 kilobyte with quality 60. However, if we look at this image and compare it with the next one, we'll see one fine little detail that's different, and that brings down the size for another 60 kilobyte. Compare this image to this image. Anybody? Yes. Blurring compresses really, really well. So if we actually use blurring on the unimportant parts, we can reduce the size for 1,600 pixels width image up to 147, right? But this is not good enough, because we do have one little thing that we can also do. Now, there are two kinds of images on the web, progressive for JPEGs, progressive JPEGs and regular sequential JPEGs. Right? We know how it works. Sequential JPEGs are the ones that come in from top to bottom. You just start looking at the image, and then they just render from top to bottom. This is going to take a while, and the user is not going to see anything until they actually see the full image. Well, they will see a parts of it, of course, but not the full image. With progressive JPEGs, which we can define again when we export images from Photoshop, it comes in rounds, so to say. They have multiple images stored inside of the JPEG file. So first of all, we see this blurry thing, and then it kind of gets better over time, right? So usually, of course, it's better to prefer progressive JPEGs because users are going to see it. But we need to look closely into how images are rendered, because when it comes to progressive JPEGs, they're going to be rendered in sequences or in so-called scans. So going from kind of multiple rounds of rendering until you get the right image, properly displayed. And you will also find performance optimization people talking about scan levels for these images. So if you look into regular optimizers and how they optimize, you will find that there are a lot of configuration files or profiles for images, how they're going to be rendered and how they're going to be scanned. You can influence it by using a specific encoder. Yes, by using a specific encoder. Just by using a specific formula on one of the specific encoders, you can bring it down for the other 10 or 15%. So this is what's going to happen. You want to ship fast and you want to show an image soon. So you just have to manipulate a little, a few chromos, how are they called? Chromo something here and there, and the scans in a specific way. And then you're going to end up with this being a first scan really quickly. And then, of course, as you can see, the colors will get better, the sharpness will get better as well. So by fourth, you're already really done, although you actually will go to fifth and sixth scan as well. And if you look into the web page test, you'll find that it actually does bring good results. So if you want to do this, you can actually look into Adapt JPEG compressor or Most JPEG, which is actually the best so far for this kind of thing. If you want to optimize for the image delivery of one landing image on your landing page, this is going to make miracles. You will actually get even 10 or 15% more compression. Losing voice at this point? All right. So what else do we have? I just have to check. Just a moment. Okay, so here's a tricky one. Have you ever thought about this specific problem? What is the best way to encode and compress a 1x1 pixel image? Why the hell do we want to do this? I mean, obviously we have placeholders, right? When, for example, things are loading, so you want to show something, or you want to kind of have a placeholder that's going to be replaced with JavaScript when the image is loaded. You can go crazy and talk about optimization of 1x1 pixel image. You might think, what's the big deal? That's not going to be big. It depends. What is the best way to encode 1x1 pixel image? I mean, you can do it with CSS, obviously, when I'm talking about a bitmap image. Base 64? But I mean, what format would you use? PNG, GIF, JPEG, WebP. Sorry? GIF, all right. That's actually a right answer. Now the question is why? And why is it actually such a difficult problem? Now, first of all, I want to introduce you to the problem, to the thing we're going to compress. Meet 1 times 1 pixel. And maybe it's a little bit humble, so I'm going to push it a bit to the top, front. So, by the way, all right? So, what are we going to do with this monster? So, uncompressed pixel is just 1 bit to 4 bytes. That's cool. Depending on how we define it, we can actually, because we can have a black and white, grayscale plus alpha channel, or RGB or RGBA, right? So, every image format specifies how to interpret data, the width and height of the image, and the number of bits or bytes per pixel, which includes some headers, obviously. So, interestingly enough, even if you think about just encoding 1 times 1 pixel, right, the amount of information that goes into the image that will encode it is quite a lot of overhead. So, they always, you know, in browsers you'll find the user agent string, which contains some information about the browser. In all these formats, you will find the magic number, as it's called. It's a fixed identifier. Like, for example, GIF87A, JFIF for JPEG, and XIF also for JPEG and PNG. There are also some decoding details, like color profiles, orientation, gamma, or DOS per pixel. Arbitrary metadata, like timestamps, copyright notices, and coordinates of when the picture was taken. And some overhead stuff, like just for verification, just to make sure that the image is right, is correctly transmitted via the wire, like markers, checksums, or paddings for robustness. If you look into them, this is what you will find in this 1 times 1 pixel images, right? They have some markers, this is the PNG, and they have some kind of checksum just to make sure that the image is correct, things like that. And this is the GIF, and this is a WebP file. And if you compare them, you'll realize that in fact GIF performs best most of the time. Just, I mean, I know that you don't need to know this, but it could be useful actually just to impress somebody. So, like, you know, like I'm doing now maybe. So GIF is actually the best. However, you can also kind of expose this idea a little bit further by thinking, okay, so what if I want to compress a 10,000 pixels times 10,000 pixels, 1 color bitmap image? What would be the best format to use it? Well, as it turns out, the best format to use it is, again, you know, these are formats that I actually specify specifically to improve rendering of those images. So lossless WebP is going to be best, but still PNG is better than GIF, let's say, at this point. And there is somebody working in a company getting paid for doing this kind of research on how to improve 1 pixel, which is kind of really impressive. Now, we talked a lot about this text stuff. I just want to finish off on something that has just been bothering me for a while, because I think that there are many details that we don't care about, although we should. Now, here's one of them. It's really annoying. I had a privilege, probably, to speak to one of the lead developers at Pornhub.com. And he highly encouraged me to use a screenshot from Pornhub.com on the UX work and the user interface design work that they do. But I decided not to for different reasons. And I started looking for different industries that might have some similar problems or situations or design problems that they have to solve. And in the end, I decided to hunt for, alcohol-related websites. I hope that we all are above 18, but otherwise I'm not allowed probably to show this to you. So most of the time, you go to an alcohol-related website or any beverages-related website, and they ask you for the date of birth. If you go to the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, they are like, whatever, I'm drunk, I don't care anymore. Because you can type in the 32nd of the 43rd of month of 1547, it will actually let you through to enter the site, right? So they don't really care because they think that you're going to be honest anyway, right? So what if we can improve it? Because most people, if they want to lie, they will lie, right? So why don't we make it easier for them to lie? How can we do it? Well, just by doing it a bit more politely. So here's a screenshot, should supposed to be a video, from Carlsberg, and they do it actually really well. So today is 2016, right? In order to access Carlsberg, we need to be born at latest 1998, right? If we're born prior to 1998, we're definitely going to enter the site. That's not a problem. Carlsberg. Okay, let's try again. Okay, so let's try again. So, okay, let's play a little game. So 1998 is a problematic year because we could be older. It's like Schrödinger's cat all over again. We could be older and we could be younger than 18 years old, so we don't know. All right, so but if we're 1997, we definitely can enter the site. If we're 1999, we cannot enter the site, right? Because now it's 2016. So if, oh, okay. If I type in 1999, I cannot enter the site. That's okay. So, okay, if it's 1997, I will enter the site. If it's 1998, it could be both. So, all right, at this point, they're asking. So today is what? Today we have September. So if I'm born in August, I can enter the site. If I'm born in October, I cannot enter the site. Right? You're following me? Yes, I have 2 people in the room. All right. So if it's 10, no, I cannot enter the site. So they basically just have the date stored, and then based on exact day, they actually require only that piece of information that they need to know that you're older or younger. So if it's 9, it's probably not enough. Because if it's the 2nd of September, I can enter the site. If it's the 1st of September, I cannot enter the site. So if I type in 02, I cannot enter the site. If I type in 01, hey, get in. So it's kind of turns this really horrible experience of entering your birth date, which nobody really cares about, into kind of a game. The thing is done really well at this point. So that's pretty nice. And of course, if you type in 1997, they don't even ask for all the other details, which is great. The other thing that I hate is this, which has been bothering me for such a long time, and I'm still wondering why it's everywhere. So I was really hoping at some point that Scotland would become independent, because then this list would grow again. And the problem is, sometimes you really don't know what to look for, right? So I'm traveling a lot, and I tend up to be in different places. So I don't know if I'm ordering something to Germany, should I be looking for at the top because it's going to be prioritized because Germany is a cool country or whatever? Or should it going to be like alphabetically sorted and be somewhere in the middle? So is it going to be Deutschland? Is it going to be Germany? I have no idea. I don't know. Netherlands is even worse. You don't know if it's going to be Netherlands or the Netherlands or Holland. Is it going to be on the top? Is it going to be at the bottom? Is it going to be anywhere at all or not? You never know. And the same with the United Kingdom or England or Great Britain or whatever you have else there for islands and whatever, and Scotland and whatever. So it's really annoying. And a very simple way of solving it is, of course, just to have an autocomplete, auto-suggest. So you start typing the country, and it doesn't matter what you're typing, whether you're typing Schweiz or Switzerland or CH, it's just going to be recognized at the back and prompt whatever it is, which is great. You type in Deutschland, you get Germany, and that's perfect. So you don't even need to worry about it too much. And then Happy Netherlands is getting what they want to. So, good for everybody. Another thing that's been bothering me a lot is this. Verification of the email input. How many people copy-paste the email when asked to verify it in the confirm email input fields? Most of you. So why do we have this input field in the first place? Because we copy-paste it anyway. If we made a mistake in the first place, it's going to be carried over to the second anyway. So what's the point of having it, right? So I've been thinking, because I've been working quite a few e-commerce projects this year, I was thinking a lot, so what would be a better place to display the email confirmation? Because obviously it's important, right? We don't want people to make mistakes in here. Because if they order something and they type in the wrong email address and we haven't verified it, it's kind of on us because we haven't verified it. I mean, they also, they typed in an incorrect email address, but it's still our kind of responsibility to make sure that they get the product that they need, or the, invoice or whatever. So where would you put the confirm email field, input field? By the way, if you ask somebody in the usability test, what does this field do? They will tell you, field? What is a field? Field is where cows live. All right, that's a different story. So people don't understand what fields are sometimes. So where would you put the email input field here? Yes? On the second page. So you would definitely postpone it. Now, I was thinking, so the best idea to put it, the place to put it, would be where people care most. Now, where does it care most about the purchase? Well, when they're about to hit that pay button. If they're paying for something, they really want to make sure that they're getting what they need, right? So why don't we have just a little box saying your email is, or just please check that your email address is correct, right? With like a really big box, shiny box, right before the pay button. That would make more sense. In fact, actually worked really well in our tests. But I don't have a screenshot in here. So maybe that would be a better place to display it, because obviously this doesn't work, right? So yeah, showing it a bit later is actually a bad idea, I think. One other thing that really annoys me is that very often you end up in a map like that, and you have to scroll all the way down if you want to select something specific. I mean, Switzerland is big enough so you can maybe get away with 3 or 4 zoom-ins. But if you're looking for Andorra or Luxembourg, it's going to be quite a journey, especially if you're not quite sure. I mean, it's not a big deal for us because we are probably, I guess, most of us from Europe and we know where countries are. But if you want to hit a specific state in the US, this is going to be a journey, right? Especially if it's a small state. Interesting, right? So what you can do then, again, a very simple thing, which I think is really cool and we should be using it all of us, is to, doesn't play? It doesn't play. Wait a second. No? Damn it, that's really annoying. So the idea was the following. So if you have your mouse pointer and you're hovering over, let's say, 4 or 5 countries, right? What it does is it prompts a little data list telling you, please specify your input without you having to zoom in. So if you're just hovering over, let's say, over here, it will actually have a data list appearing with 4 or 5 options that you can select from. So you don't really have to zoom in all the way to that country and select it. And you can use it in many different ways, right? For example, okay, interesting. For example, you can also use it in all kind of infographics in data visualization, because very often you have this kind of dots or states or cities or areas that are very difficult to touch. You cannot get any information about them at all. So actually having the same experience where you can click somewhere and then have a data list with 4 or 5 options that you can choose from is actually way better than what they have in here. Although, I mean, this is really great visualization and everything. But I mean, could be done a bit better. Okay, and then you can also do this. How would you build it? Sorry? You would clone it, yes. You probably would need to draw it in Canvas and then, imitate it with web audio. So yeah. And also one important thing that we tend to forget, and I do want to mention it, because, I mean, not this, because we tend to, art direction, the thing that we talked about in the morning today, very early on, I think is really, really important. And this is what we're trying to do as well now with the redesign, but also kind of not thinking about just changing the icon or changing the images, but maybe a bit more than that. Here's a very nice example for it. Emirates, I hope the video works. They use some sort of art direction on the front page. I'm wondering if you can spot it. So obviously they change the orientation, right? So the woman is always looking at the logo, right? But there is something else that you might or might not have noticed. Yes? Yes, so the woman is looking on the other side. But if you compare the glasses of what she has in her hands, it changes as well. Pay attention. This is an international version. Right? So cultural changes, whatever, sometimes you really have to do a bit more than just changing an image. In this case, I'm pretty sure that most sites that you are building are not like this. But here, if you have like a big storyline going on, and you'll find this a lot in Japanese and Chinese websites, you will actually have to recreate this kind of immersive storytelling altogether. So they really change the illustrations and the path through the illustrations completely as they're actually scrolling through the page. So if you are, because of course mobile first and responsive and everything, it really changes the images altogether on the smaller screens. Right? And they actually partly change the storyline itself because it would be too detailed otherwise. But I know what you're thinking. We don't build this kind of website. Don't show us this. We don't build it. Because we build things like this all the time. Right? Maybe like, this kind of really colorful and interesting visual experiences where as you scroll down, hopefully shortly now, you end up with really interesting interactive helicopters flying around. Right? And yes, of course you don't build things like that, but you build something very similar. If you look into the landscape of the different cultures, the different designers designing different designs, you will still find many similarities. This kind of thing where you see like 5 or 6 blocks, content blobs if you like, they're everywhere, like literally everywhere. So this is a Russian website where actually they have, let's see, where they have the same thing with these floating bubbles. It's kind of they're selling lots of properties in Russia, but it's actually the same thing. And you even have it here in Switzerland, because we have a FIFA World Museum, and exactly the same pattern is being used as well in here. Right? Sometimes, quite often actually, you end up with designing these content blobs or designing around these content blobs, which require a lot of art direction. So it's really, really important. And even things, websites like Typekit, when they have this crazy monster in here, as you probably have seen, right? And then you hover over it and you get some details, and then it kind of becomes one column in the small view. And I also do want to just give a little hint for the Swiss airline or Swiss website. It's really, really great. Everything is really just great. Yes, I'm finishing. All right, so with this in mind, I just want you to think for a second how you would build something like this. Which would need to be responsive, which is basically like a platform where you you want users to come to the site and sell tickets, and you also have the floor plan. So sometimes you have like premium seatings and like really cheap seatings and things like that. So you want to indicate it somehow, and you want the entire experience to be responsive as well. So when users come to your site, what you want to have is this kind of hover experience over these polygons, right? So when users are actually hovering over some of them, they can obviously zoom in and zoom out. They get information about the settings. And then they can zoom in deeper and select not only the area, but the actual row where they want to sit. And they can go deeper and select the actual seat where they want to sit as well. The problem is, normally you would use SVG for it, but performance will not work. Because here you would have like 5,000 or 6,000 SVG elements, and moving them around is just not going to work. So what always works for performance is to separate the entire thing into tiles. This is why, if you're running out of memory on Google Chrome, for example, or on Firefox 2, you will see that you see some parts of the page, they're like rectangles, or squares to be precise. So the reason for that is they separate the entire thing into 4 to 16 squares, and then they paint and render and load them all independently, and then pull them together. So this is what you can always do. They can't do it with SVG, so they did it with Canvas. All right, so you're getting all the slides anyway, whether you want it or not. There's a lot of stuff you can take away from today. Apply pseudo-elements and broken images, fluid type with font size, nested links with object, highlight row columns with pseudo-elements. We can also have padded lines with box shadow. We can use, we didn't cover most of it, I'm sorry. And test scan levels, whatever. I think you get the idea. Thank you so much for being here.